What's your scariest camping experience? Went camping in deep Appalachia in a tent. Woke up to a weird feeling that I was laying on something. Then I felt it move. A snake had made its way under my tent and I think it was trying to get warm as it stopped moving right under where my back was. After me moving a bit, it finally went on its merry way. I'll never forget how it felt moving underneath me. I was camping once in Michigan, in a pretty secluded spot with distinct individual campsites. It was in the fall, so dead leaves were all over the ground. When we were settling into sleep, we started to hear these slow, consistent footsteps on the leaves. They'd walk around the campsite, circle our tent, just walk all around without any clear goal and without stopping. Obviously we assumed it was some kind of animal, but when we rushed out with a light there was nothing. I mean, no sound, no trace of anything. Once we were back in the tent, these footsteps immediately started up again, and they didn't come from far away, they started up right next to our tent. We repeated this whole rigmarole probably 3 more times, because of how distinct and close and creepy those footsteps were, and we never caught even a glimpse of what was walking around. The next morning, we were sitting by the fire and started hearing the steps again, only to look down and realize it was the sound of multiple small frogs hopping around the campsite. Camping in the Serengeti with Maasai tribe men as guards, sitting around the fire when suddenly the Maasai looks out into the pitch blackness, turns the flashlight on, illuminating the eyes of a lion 40 yards out, just staring at us. I never heard a thing. Sheer terror when I was a kid at Boy Scout summer camp. One kid left a couple airheads out on the picnic table. Everyone woke up in the middle of the night too. No joke, 30+ raccoons fighting over airheads and going into tents looking for more food. If you've never heard that many hissing and growling raccoons at the same time, good for you. When my current wife started dating, we went out camping in the fall. Leaves were down, kinda chilly, very romantic. In the middle of the night, we heard what we assumed was a 2-legged creature near our car. Being the man I was, I got the boots on and was headed out. Wife, girlfriend, hands me this shitty little pocket knife. As soon as I undo the zipper, I hear the footsteps running away. I'm all manly, so I go check anyway. Upon returning to the tent, I'm faced with a .380 handgun pointed at me. That was pretty scary. She sent me into the forest with a pocket knife. Didn't want me to know she had a gun, so it wasn't weird. Solo camp in the middle of nowhere. When I woke up in the morning, someone had made a cup of tea and partially drank it in the middle of the night. No sign of anyone anywhere. Late at night, camping in the desert, heard footsteps all around our tents. Thought it was maybe some drunk guy from one of the nearby camps who was riding dirt bikes and stuff all day. Couldn't see anyone. Couldn't see any shadows. Kept hearing the footsteps, literally inches from our tent. Woke up my friend silently and made him listen too. We were freaking out. Finally, they went away, so I slowly opened my tent zipper to look around and see what it was. Threw out a glow stick, and saw some eyes flash in the darkness. Turns out it was 2 white desert foxes, whose footsteps were somehow extremely heavy sounding. When I saw them, they were on our camp table, eating all of our chocolate. Oops. Once in the wilderness, me and a couple of other guys, drunk as we were, started howling at the moon only to inadvertently attract real wolves. They showed up at our campsite about 1.5 hours later when we were in our hammocks getting ready to sleep. No harm done. They sniffed around for a couple of minutes and then went off. Guess they were disappointed in what they found, and luckily not desperately hungry. Anyway, I was very scared and tried to remain completely still and silent during this brief encounter. I was about 8, I didn't want to sleep in the tent with my sister, so I slept on a cot under the stars. Woke up to a bear sniffing my head/neck. I was basically paralyzed with fear. The bear left me and went to sniff around for snacks. It made enough noise to wake my parents, who then scared it away. I moved my cot into my sister's tent immediately after. I was pretty young, went camping with my dad in Alabama. It's late at night, the embers of the fire are dying down. We're about to go to sleep, when we hear what I can only describe as a bone-chilling moan in the woods. We looked at each other in amp, decided it was trees rubbing together, but then it happened 2 more times. My dad grabbed the flashlight and amp. I walked behind him with a big stick, determined I would save him if something went wrong. Eventually we discover a woman lying on the ground, not far from our campsite. She was on a hill, with her head facing down, feet uphill, continuing to moan. Turns out, she had so much to drink that she could hardly talk, but she was also camping out in these woods with her boyfriend. They had a big fight in Amp. He drove away, leaving her alone in the forest. She had seen our fire dying in Amp, wanted to give us the rest of her firewood before she left too, but had tripped in Amp, was too drunk to get up. We got her back to her campsite, and Amp made sure she wasn't driving anywhere that night. I'll never forget that moaning sound, though. Thought our tent was being attacked by 3 bears. Turns out someone's dogs just got loose and the light outside made them look gigantic. Used to camp at this fairly secluded spot on state land. It has since been discovered and become popular. Unfortunately, I've been going to that site since I was a kid, and it had become an annual tradition for my buddies and I to kinda unplug and rough it for a few days. However, at the time, a little over 15 years ago now, it was relatively unknown, and it was a bit of a trek to get to the campsite. Middle of the woods, but close to a lake, perfect for swimming. We're talking no cell signal, no light pollution. You're just out in the wilderness. My buddies and I were geeked to get out there and spend the week camping every summer. One summer afternoon I'm the first to arrive, ready for a week of camping, drinking, and swimming. However, to my dismay, I discover that the site already has an established campsite going. There's a couple tents set up. Granted, it's a fairly large campsite, so I decide to haul my gear over and see if I can talk the other campers into letting us share the spot. Who knows, they might be cool, and maybe it'll be one big party. I come up to the site, and there's no people. The tents are empty. There was evidence of a campfire, so I know there were people here not too long ago. I decide to check the lake, maybe they went swimming. There's a steep path that leads from the site to the lake, and as I'm walking alongside it, I discover some debris that is blown down along the path. There's a sleeping bag, some tools, and some clothes that had been on a line, but now they're all in the dirt. All evidence that this site has actually been set up for a while. The clothes are wet with ditch water. They've been sitting on the ground in the path for some time. There's no people at the lake. And when I return to the site, upon further investigation I discover that this site has been abandoned for some time. But that doesn't explain why they just left everything behind. From what I could tell, the people camping here had left in a big freaking hurry. There's clothes, there's food and other gear. I mean, it's an entire camp. The tents were fairly new. I mean, it's not just stuff that you leave behind unless you're scrambling and only grabbing the essentials. What was weird to me was that the fire was out, but there was still ice in their coolers and beers, so it couldn't have been too long ago that they were there. My other buddies arrive and we decide to set up camp nearby and keep an eye on it. Maybe the people had to leave for an emergency or something. We wind up camping out the whole week and no evidence of people coming back to retrieve their stuff. Luckily, the DNR happened to stop by on patrol and we filled them in our discovery. They let us know they'd be packing up the stuff and take it into a lost and found up at their station. Kinda creepy, mostly weird. Who knows what happened to those people? Edit. I want to add that I did see evidence of little propane cans in the fire pit. Like those little cans that you use to light your camping stove. They were all burst open. We hypothesized that the campers were partying and tossed the canisters into the fire like drunk idiots, and one of them burst open, somebody got hurt, and they had to leave in a hurry. Pretty sure, 2 guys were going to rape my friend and me. We were teenagers, 16 and 18, and went up alone. We made dinner and were having a good time in the evening when some guy passed by our site in the river. He had a fishing pole, so we were like whatever. He asked to go through our site to the road, and we figured it was harmless enough and said yeah. He stopped and looked around our site and started asking us questions. How old are you? Where are you from? How long are you staying? Typical questions that were none of his business, but we were naive enough to answer. He eventually leaves and heads down the canyon on the road. A couple of hours later, he shows back up with a buddy. Both of these guys are middle-aged, probably mid-40s. They start asking more questions. The original guy walks around and snoops about our campsite. We got an uneasy feeling and were super grateful when they eventually left. But they went up the canyon, rather than back where they came from. Another couple hours pass and it's dark. My friend mentions how she can't hear anything because of the river, and it had her a bit antsy. We talked, and it turned out we had both been on edge since the guys left. We had never seen them go back down the canyon. We both had a gut feeling that we needed to leave, and fast. Maybe nothing would have happened, but we both felt it. The guys asked all the right questions to know that we would be there alone and defenseless that night. Oh, you've come to the right place. About 20 years ago in Pisgah National Forest, I was camping in a hammock for the first time. I didn't have a rain tarp yet, leaving myself completely uncovered save for a sleeping bag. Now, this was a trip from a summer camp in the area, so there were about 6 other teens with me. One kid decided, hey, chocolate, that's not a smellable, right? And left the chocolate in his pack, right next to mine, under the hammock. You may see where this is going. Lo and behold, around 12 o'clock, a juvenile black bear moseys his way on into our campsite looking for that sweet, sweet chocolate. As he was messing with the packs underneath the hammock, his back kept bumping into me. I was starting to wake up, but I was very groggy. I kinda thought it was the kid looking for something in his pack. The bear realizes that the hammock is moving, and gives it a bat with his paw, like a cat with yarn, swinging me. At this point, I realize this is not a camper, and start screaming. The rest of the campsite woke up, and we threw rocks at the bear until it ran away. The kid got a severe punishment. When I was a kid, Probably around 11 to 13, my best friend's grandparents lived on a farm, maybe 100 acres of forest with a few clearings and a house, that we used to camp out in all the time. One night, a few of us were camping, and we heard repeated thumps and screaming coming from the trees. We had literally just finished reading a book about Bigfoot in school and were positive that Bigfoot was out in the woods hitting trees and roaring. We got out of the tent, terrified, and walked through the woods towards the noise. Note, I guess people really do this kind of dumb thing. It's not just in horror movies. We eventually came to a clearing and found several of my friend's uncles trying to fix an old barn. While they were absolutely shit-faced, at like 2 o'clock in the morning. The thumps were the sound of them hitting wood with hammers. The screams were when they missed and hit themselves, because of the alcohol. We were terrified, but now it's hilarious. I was tent camping in Arkansas around 2003 to 2004, and the Blair Witch Project was still fresh on my mind. I was about 20 years old at the time. Around 2 to 3 in the morning, we're woken up by what sounds like a small child running around our tent crying and trying to get in. I was thoroughly freaked out. Finally, decided to open the tent, and there was a kid that couldn't have been more than 3 years old, scared half to death and only wearing a diaper. I had lots of thought going through my head, but mostly, how the hell do I handle this? I can't really go campsite to campsite, the ranger office is closed, and I'm standing there in the middle of the night holding a child that isn't mine. We had decided to call the cops, figuring it was the safest thing to do. Just then a lady walks down the trail and is like, "How did you get out?" The kid was saying, "Mama, mama," and went straight to her. She nonchalantly said, "Thank you," and walked away. Now, as a parent, I can't imagine how much more that would freak me out if it were my kid. I went on a road trip with some friends to Lake Chelan. We left late and got lost. This was before cell phones. We didn't have a map and trusted my friend's memory. So we pull off the road and decide to camp for the night at a grassy area. We have limited lights and quickly make our tent. We're woken in the morning by someone hitting the tent and screaming to get off his property. We'd inadvertently camped on some poor guy's lawn. We were just dumb 18-year-old kids, but have never packed up camp that quickly before. Not really camping, but my first time out in the field at Foot Stewart. We had a small herd of about 10 wild boars go tearing through our bivouac area. I didn't really realize how dangerous they were until I saw everyone hauling ass to their vehicles. I hadn't been assigned a vehicle yet, so I just monkeyed up a tree and waited while they tore into our rations, wrecked our tent, and then effed off. Took about an hour to destroy thousands of dollars worth of equipment. I was hunting in the Yukon, and woke up at night to a bright sky and a loud roaring noise. Crawled out of the tent and watched a meteor hit the mountain right across from us. That could have been our campsite. This was 25 to 30 years ago. All our friends had was a map with a red circle. If we didn't come back in a month or so, we would be somewhere in that circle. First time camping. Was with wife and dog in a tent that the upper half was mesh and see-through. Woke up around sunrise to my dog growling at something. I leaned forward to check. There's a bear cub walking through our campsite. The scary part was that I didn't want my dog growling to attract the mother of the cub to defend it, so I pinned my dog on the bed and held his mouth to get him to be quiet till the bear left. Heart was beating out of my chest. Later I found out it was an orphan bear, and it was friendly to humans and survived by stealing food from garbage/campsites. I was on a trip with the YMCA Camp Witchy, and on our last day on trail we got up early to hike the last few miles to where the van to pick us up was. We rounded a turn on the trail and could see the van and a weird swirling dark cloud on the trail ahead. Then the guy in front screamed and all of us were attacked by these big black wasps. I accidentally got on in my hand, and it was the size of a cicada. I only got 2 stings, but the 2 guys in front got closer to 10. We hauled ass back up the trail away from the van, and our counselor immediately started handing out EpiPens, but none of us turned out to be allergic. We hiked the long way around the wasps to the van, but man, I was shaking the whole time. In college, I did a lot of solo car camping from the back of my truck I owned at the time. I went to a remote public area in the Ozarks and planned to stay overnight. After setting up all my bedding and having dinner, and a sugary dessert, I decided to hunker down for the night. Well, about 45 minutes after turning off the light, I start hearing leaves crunching in the woods about 30 yards away. Not really concerned, I write it off as an opossum, deer, coyote, etc. just moving through the area. However, my imagination started going wild as it always does, and I start thinking of the worst situations. More leaves crunching, but closer, definitely in the campsite. I usually carry a can of bear spray, but being a dumb kid, I didn't think about the fact that I was in an enclosed space until I was ready to use it. More crunching leaves, but further away. I start to relax a little as eventually they disappear. Nerves completely racked, I try to go to sleep. I think at some point I get into a really light sleep and wake up about 2 to 3 hours later. It's about 2 in the morning and there is very obviously something walking between me and the campfire. At this point a deep, loud, and incredibly scary voice from inside my truck camper asks, "Do you believe in God?" I freaking start screaming and turn on headlamps, thrashing, and get ready to defend for my life. The footsteps run away and disappear into the woods as I'm in full panic mode. I have to tell myself I hallucinated the whole thing because of the sugary dessert I ate before bed. Still gets my heart racing when I think about it too much to this day. I was on a camping trip with scouts, and me and my friend were put in the same tent as this weird kid. He was acting up all the time, getting into fights, and showing off how many knives he had. Anyway, one night we're in our tent playing blackjack and I guess I said something that pissed him off because he started yelling at me. Well, that let the scout leaders know we were still up, so they told us to get to bed. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke up to him choking me. I thrashed about and tried to get him off me, but I couldn't focus and was panicking. I remember the tent seemed to be getting darker, and how heavy my eyelids were getting. My chest and head were hurting and aching trying to get me to breathe, but I just felt so tired. I was starting to fade away, thinking my last thing I would hear was his laughter. When, wham, my friend had woken up cause of me struggling and him laughing and got up and started clobbering the dude. I was part coughing and part breathing once he got off me. My friend screamed for help and it got the adults' attention. He was yelled at for what he did, and they shuffled around people so that he would be sleeping in a tent alone, right near the adults' tents. I got into a tent with my older brother, and I must have woken up 3 times that night kicking and screaming from nightmares of him killing me. When we all got back from the camp, his parents were told what happened and that he was banned from scouts. They also told my mom, and it must have taken the active will of God for her not to go and kick him. He got banned from a bunch of other activities that we both did, so I didn't really ever see him again. I still wake up scared from nightmares of being choked or suffocated. And while I am a pretty sound sleeper, if anyone tries to walk or get close to me while I am asleep, I shoot up awake and panic. I can't even really nap with my dogs cause of it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to sleep soundly around anyone ever again. I was an Air Force cadet for most of my youth. From 13, when I was about 16 I was a cadet sergeant and was put in control of about 10 guys, lower ranks than me, on a navigation exercise. This was quite a while ago before OS really came about. We used to do wild stuff and it was great. But I was the only female at this particular time, and when I led the guys to our checkpoint, we were instructed to camp for the night and continue to the next checkpoint in the morning. So we made camp, a fire, and just hung out eating our rations. There was this weird guy, maybe 14, but physically massive, who always rubbed me up the wrong way. It was really dark and quiet, and he just goes, "Hey, I have a good idea, let's rape Sergeant Cameron." My blood went cold, and I looked over my other cadets. They all laughed it off. "Shut the dude down." One said, "What? She's just a cool guy with long hair." They tried to make it casual, but I knew they were actually aware and trying to protect me. Before this, he had bragged about knowing how to break a person's neck and wanting to kill animals. I didn't sleep that night, just sat up by the fire and reported him when we got back to base the next day. If I didn't have good mates with me that night who respected me, I don't know what would have happened. Hiking a trail in East Tennessee. Hadn't seen a soul since leaving the parking lot that morning. Make camp up on top of a rock bluff 50 yards off the trail as the sun sets, quick dinner, then probably asleep by 7 o'clock. Around 11 o'clock I wake up hearing voices which sound like muttered German. I listen for a few minutes and I can hear footsteps and the voices coming toward the tent. I wake up my hiking partner, who hears the same thing I'm hearing. The footsteps stop what seems like 10 feet from the tent, and the same 2 mumbling voices. I unzip the tent and look out, and there's nothing. Get my flashlight, shine around. Nothing. After a few minutes I get back in the tent, we both try to sleep and after a few minutes the voices start up again and what sounds like someone cutting a tree with an axe. My partner pulls on his boots. We both agree the sound is 10 feet away to the right of the tent. He unzips the tent slowly, we are still hearing sounds. He jumps outside with his flashlight, heads in that direction. Nothing. We sit outside the tent for over an hour because there's no way we're going to sleep, but we hear nothing. Eventually we are both about to pass out, so we go back in the tent and fall asleep. Around 3:30 the axe sound starts again. We both just lie there listening and a few minutes later we hear the cracking and whooshing sound of a falling tree, heard and felt the thud as it hit the ground. We both jumped up and scrambled out of the tent and there was nothing. No sound at all. No wind whistling through the trees. No bugs. No frogs. Just silence. We packed up everything in minutes, but decided not to leave because the climb back down to the trail was difficult in daylight and too risky in the dark. We sit there until the sun comes up without hearing the voices or axe again. We'd calmed down somewhat by that point and started searching the area. We probably went 100 yards in every direction from our camp and there was no sign anyone had been there and certainly no large recently fallen tree.